are talking A.P.E.X. This one is directed by Philip J. Roth, who also co-wrote this movie. And this is a 1994 film that stars Richard Keats and Mitchell Cox, and is a Terminator-esque robotic combat movie with time travel. There you go. Now, we have a situation in the year 2072, I believe it is, where there is some type of viral outbreak which is causing problems for the world as it is then. And they, for some reason, decide that to combat this, they are going to send sort of robots back in the past to try and, you know, get samples from that time ultimately. And they send robots because they don't want to create paradoxes by sending humans back. However, something goes wrong and a scientist is going to send back to the 70s who unwittingly infects someone in the 70s and creates a sort of parallel timeline where when we come back to 2072, it's a post-apocalyptic world and the robots are running amok, and it's up to this kind of version of the scientist in the future to try and figure out what's going on, along with a kind of group of sort of space marine types, and everyone he knows is different. Like, for example, his wife is now a virus-infected kind of soldier, things like that. What will happen? You have to watch the movie to find out. So actually a pretty good kind of mid-90s robot action film. As I've said in many of these type of reviews, there was a slew of kind of robo, cyber this, cyber that movies that came out in the late 80s to the kind of the mid-90s on the back of the success of Terminator and RoboCop. This one obviously clearly is taking its kind of inspiration from the Terminator franchise with the kind of the time travel kind of situation. But it's actually a reasonable effort for a kind of a low budget kind of, you know, action movie that came out straight to video. So what can I say that works about it? I think the plot is a little bit more complex than some of these kind of more just shoot 'em up. I mean, there is a degree of that. But then there is a you know, an attempt here to have a little bit more of an intriguing plot, as I say, involving kind of time travel, paradoxes, things like that. You know, alternate timelines. So there's a little bit more going on than just kind of robots on the loose killing people. We do have that overreaching arc with the time travel situation as well. I've got to say, I think the kind of the futuristic sort of post-apocalyptic worlds are really well realised. Obviously for a low budget, they're all filmed on this kind of like desolate kind of buildings and stuff like that. They really do look like they've been, you know, seen better years, let's just say that. We get some cool looking kind of like transports, which apparently was a real transport that was like a prototype in the 70s that was never really kind of used, but it's a real vehicle, but it looks kind of, you know, retro futuristic in a way, which is quite fun. We've got kind of lots of cool weapons. I think the robots look pretty good. They look, you know, they're a little bit over designed, but nonetheless, they look pretty good and menacing, and have like gun arms and things like that, as well as our kind of soldiers that equally have interesting kind of tech on them as well. That was all sort of quite fun. There's kind of lots of explosions, lots of you know, prosthetics in regards to bits exploding and pyrotechnics in for explosions and gunshots, things like that. Lots of kind of nice you know, practical work done obviously in mid-90s is pretty much what was happening. I think the characters were quite fun. I think our scientist Sinclair, they don't quite play as much fish out of water as I maybe would have thought they would have. But nonetheless, it's an interesting kind of, he does an interesting performance, obviously keeping his cards close to his chest. He's the only one that knows there are alternate timelines, and he's having to deal with the fact that his wife doesn't recognise him, his friend doesn't recognise him, and there's kind of, people are kind of realising there's something not quite right there. I call it the character of Shepard, who is this kind of like military guy that is ultimately part of his team and really his kind of his rival, I suppose, but he still acts in a professional way, like a professional kind of soldier. That was kind of quite good. There's some quite comedic moments as well. And, you know, as I said, it's peppered throughout with various kind of action sequences fighting these kind of robots, which do look pretty cool. And that's not to say. Now, we have seen, you know, versions of the kind of like the different cyborg movies in the 90s. I recently reviewed one called Prototype, which again tried to do something a little bit different, but it ended up being quite dull. This one isn't dull, I would say, so I think this one succeeds in having an interesting storyline with a compelling narrative with some fun kind of cheesy and schlocky moments as well, but still is entertaining, which is the kind of the main difference. So what can I say on the negative column? As with time travel movies, there are kind of questions that sometimes don't make sense, and thinking, for example, you know, where are all these robots coming from? It never really kind of explains why there is so many kind of robots are in this kind of world and where they are kind of being produced. The original laboratory, you know, we're led to believe maybe had a few of them, but certainly not the kind of the world-ending situation that is seen in this movie, and it's never really addressed. Nor is kind of the original virus in the kind of the original timeline. Again, that's just kind of there, and it's kind of, when we go back to that, we can only assume that it's kind of still there. So there are a few things, and this is the problem with time travel. It's kind of like it always creates kind of problems, and this is no different. I have to say, I think some of the action sequences get a little bit samey. I mean, they're fun, but, you know, you've got these kind of robots lurking around, and they're kind of just, like, wandering around, it seems, and shooting, and then we have our kind of guys shooting back at them. And it looks okay. They're well done, but there's not a lot of variety in them, and ultimately they do become a little bit kind of samey, to be honest with you. And the movie does have that schlocky feel. Some of the kind of the dialogue and the kind of like the set design, although it's kind of fun, is on the schlocky side. So this certainly can't be considered, you know, more of a cerebral kind of sci-fi, but it is, I think, still kind of quite intelligent to a point, at least for a kind of a B movie. So, you know, when you have these videos on the shelves and people just wanted because action and explosions and robots, this one does actually have an attempt to do something a little bit more, you know, with the kind of the plot involving more of a compelling storyline. And I think there are elements where that really does work, but sometimes it does end up just being kind of like Space Marines and robots kind of shooting at each other, and I think the action sequences could have been a little bit more dynamic, to be honest with you. It's quite often it ends up being, you know, a robot standing still and a human standing still shooting at each other, and it's kind of like, you know, they're a little less exciting than you would maybe think. Overall, though, this is an above-average 90s kind of cyborg robot action movie. I don't know if it's necessarily like a classic film that should be kind of watched by science fiction fans, nonetheless, but it's a bit of fun with a little bit more going on than a lot of these. So I'll give this one, I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Actually, I do think it's considerably more so than a lot of the other films that we had of this period. So I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.